Catherine is probably all out.
You know, I wondered about that.
That's correct.
I'll fix the hours.
That's correct.
But look at his face. Sometimes we'll get the other F in there. No biggie.
Not a big deal.
Anything else we do?
Well,
How are you?
good.
I'm good. And you will give me your signature on the print. Stuff here. Yeah.
Oh, this is just a-
Grant.
Hello, Chief. Good evening. Good evening. See?
Oh,
These are just examples for the drone.
You're right here, municipal government. Now, Janora Moore is not with us tonight, she was called away. So we're only doing one piece.
Okay, we're doing one. Okay.
I meant to give you a call, just thinking about the ground tour. The mayor is reassigned Aldermen and boards. I'm no longer
Okay.
so just want to know.
No problem. Actually, our public safety secretary asked me something about that year. Because I guess maybe we've had a police order she heard.
New business.
Yeah.
She was on the police board. I said, she asked me, and I said, no, I haven't heard. So,
And we will vote on
Well, I try to assume that was maybe not an official, but.
yeah, that's, thank you very much.
Okay, well, my pleasure. I guess we still. There was an email from the mayor, I assume that was. I don't think that needs a word.
No, I don't think we just signs of every sign. Said we talked about time.
Okay.
Thank you very
Good
much.
pleasure.
Good evening.
How's it going, Sean?
They want to sit in the big man's chair.
They were in the area, they wanted to come up.
Gonna get some work done tonight.
Yeah.
You girls know how to say yay? Aye. How you doing? It's good. It's good to see you. You guys are getting so big. Holy cow. You want to use a gavel? You want to use a gavel? You want to tell your mom she's out of order? You want to tell your mom she's out of order? Here, see? Out of order. I can either hit that, I can either hit that, or I can throw it.
What's the idea? That was something. It's really nice.
Show you some support.
Can you go back all the way up? He said it's really nice because it's not, just kind of informative, it's kind of for our inspection. Even about, that's pretty cool.
Somebody else just came back from Cancun last night. I heard down with 35 people, kids,
guys
soccer team,
fire marshal, and in some cases they're kind of forced into being fire marshal.
They have all.
He
He
takes it serious,
actually got all of the crime and stuff, and
so therefore anything, you know, that his he very much takes from education. Yeah, he's fantastic.
They can take
we're sitting here.
Some of this, I heard this came from.
You see, I had to explain to him, I said, oh,
And I think there's the mission.
I thought I was okay, I don't want to kill this because it was late to us. I know, and I thought, okay, I don't do this thing, so I guess I'll just do this. And once you go through and now, super. Teresa brought it over to me, I said, you have to do that here and go about your business because we're going to have a few days more discussions about that because we have a new fire marshal now. Well, and I'll tell you, he has a very interesting but the timing right now to approach the subject after is not exactly good. Because one of the things he said to me, he said, okay, so the area over there.
I have it.
How you doing? Likewise. Is it all queued up and this is the new setup?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I don't pretend to know any of the technical stuff, so I'm glad you
Basically,
do.
this little box goes to the camera, and it's connected to the Wi-Fi, and there's a software that send the video to YouTube. That's it.
All right, very good. Well, thanks for setting that up. Hopefully,
Thank you.
Can you tell attendance and all that? Like, hey, 20 people watching,
I will
50
be
people.
right now 5 people have said that they will be watching on my Facebook page.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get more people.
Hopefully, this work gets around pretty close.
Yeah, you see how that's going to
That's not
work.
That's a raw deal.
And then I
They usually don't get more than that.
Yeah. So, he's in the book, he's rubbing out section or something like that. So you don't even know where they did it last year. I told him, I said, look, the idea of this is we did the Titanic's first crossing last year. We got away.
How are you?
We're not sending it back across the second time.
How you doing, Mike? Good. So your boss? Yeah, that's right. She was telling me, she had moved here, and I guess they bought it. Oh, yeah. That, you know, she was basically. Yeah. So, pretty well. Very well.
Rolled up in a tube. And she's like, is this my fun project study? Why, yes it is. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah, the address of yours. Go to those two.
Yeah, no, it's one.
You can do whatever you want. No, actually, he's aware there while you're talking.
Hi, how you doing? Looks the same as last time. This is the difference.
Good.
How's it going?
Are we up and running?
Oh, yes.
How are you?
Yeah, we are.
Good. Yeah, I was watching the last time it was cutting out.
But now we are connected to the box.
Good.
And I mean, I can show you the quality. It's quite different, you know. So there's a little bit of delay. But
No, that's all right. That's good. Good deal.
Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Board of Aldermen to order. Would you please stand for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would the city clerk please take roll call?
Alderman Reed.
Here.
Alderman Waller.
Here.
Alderman Stetter.
Excused.
Alderman Sharda.
Here.
Alderman Beatty.
Here.
Alderman Miguel.
Here.
Alderman Anderson.
Here.
Alderman Kennedy.
Excused.
6 are present. You have your form, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is presentations, communications, and appointments. We have the oath of police officers. I understand that Officer Moore is not here this evening, so we will proceed on with Officer Andrew, is it Westhoff?
Westhoff, sir.
Westhoff, okay.
Andrew, if you would raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Andrew Westphal,
I, Andrew Westhoff,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I possess all the qualifications prescribed by law
that I possess all the qualifications prescribed by law
for the position of police officer of the city of Crestwood,
for the position of police officer of the city of Crestwood,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
the provisions of all laws of this state affecting charter cities,
the provisions of all laws of this state affecting charter cities,
and the ordinances of the city of Crestwood, Missouri,
and the ordinances of the city of Crestwood, Missouri,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties of police officer of the city of Crestwood.
and that I will faithfully perform the duties of police officer of the city of Crestwood.
Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you so much, and welcome to the Crestwood Police Department. Thank you. Thrilled to have you, sir. Okay, the next item is the oath of office for the new firefighter paramedic, Mr. Brandon Myers.
Will raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Brandon B. Myers,
I, Brandon B. Myers,
do hereby declare
do hereby declare
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
the Constitution of the State of Missouri,
and the Charter of the City of Crestwood.
and the Charter of the City of Crestwood.
I swear I will protect, safeguard, and preserve life, health, and property against fire and other perils.
I swear that I will protect, safeguard, and preserve life, health, and property against fire and other perils.
I will uphold the standards of my profession, continually striving to achieve the objective and ideals the fire service instills.
I will uphold the standards of my profession, continually striving to achieve the objectives and ideals the fire service instills.
I will never allow my personal feelings or danger to self deter me from my responsibilities as a first responder and guardian of the community.
I will never allow my personal feelings or danger to self deter me from my responsibilities as a first responder and guardian of the community.
I will at all times respect the properties and rights of all.
I will at all times respect the property and rights of all.
I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith and trust, and I will remain true to the ethics of the fire service.
I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith and trust, and I will remain true to the ethics of the fire service.
As a member of the Crestwood Fire Department, I accept the self-imposed and self-enforced obligation as my responsibility and make these promises so solemnly, freely, and upon my honor.
As a member of the Crestwood Fire Department, I accept this self-imposed and self-enforced obligation as my responsibility and make these promises so solemnly and freely upon my honor.
I had the opportunity to meet Mr. Myers this last week, and we want to welcome you to the Crestwood Fire Department and hope you have a long and prosperous life here with us. We appreciate your time, and certainly thank you for coming on board.
Now I'd like to invite Brandon's wife Alex up to put his badge on for the first time.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the second quarter financial report. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mayor. In your packet, you'll find the summary charts for the various funds with Q2, first quarter, and year-to-date results, as well as year-to-date as a percent of budget and the fiscal year 2017 budget numbers for comparison, so that you can get a more comprehensive understanding of where we're at. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of general fund performance and some discussion and analysis, and then we'll run through some of the various departmental activities for the year. So, as we usually started off, here's a review of the 2017 general fund budget. You can see budgeted revenues were at $7.7 million and expenditures were budgeted at $8.2 for a deficit of $524,000. That then would bring, as of January 1, 2017, we expected our fund balance in the general fund to decrease from $4.6 million to $4.0 million. In the second quarter, revenues exceeded expenditures by $321,000. You can see revenues collected so far as a percent of budget are just over 50% at 52.19%. And expenditures are trending behind budget at 44.38%. However, this is a similar position that we found ourselves in last year, where we find that the front part of the year, the front half of the year tends to be more revenue heavy, and the back half of the year tends to be more expenditure heavy. Comparing Q2 17 versus Q2 16, you can see that on the revenue side, we have seen a decrease of about $170,000 year over year. And on the expenditure side, we're actually behind expenditures for Q2 2016 by a smaller amount, $28,000. And the main reasons for the revenue differences vary. And again, referring to the chart that's included in the packet, you can kind of walk down the line and see the various categories of revenues and expenditures. But the main differences, property tax collections are down. This is primarily due to timing, not some overall shift in the community. We are seeing sales taxes down about $60,000. And what's especially noteworthy there is that Q2 2016 did not have any use tax revenue. Q2 2017 does include use tax revenue. So that's down $60,000 with an additional revenue source. Fines and forfeitures have decreased about $50,000. We're attributing that to the municipal court reform impact. It's just, we don't know what this new reality looks like in the post-Senate Bill 5 world. And, we're still having trouble budgeting and predicting what that's going to look like. Excuse me. And then licenses and permits. There's a pretty significant variance there, but that's primarily due to the timing of the Sam's Club business license, which was received in the third quarter this year versus the second quarter last year. So mainly just a timing issue there. On the positive side, you can see investment earnings have increased significantly, and that was due to the board's decision to change banking investment changes based on Mr. Jatt's recommendation last year. On the expenditure side, there's a lot of variances that are occurring. Obviously, we have higher salaries this year than last year. There's timing purchase issues. We've also had a decent bit of turnover, and that would explain some of it as well, and so they're kind of offsetting each other. This just provides a chart that you've seen before already a couple times. The quarterly breakdown of revenues. The light-colored bars represent Q1 revenue collections, and then the green-colored bars with numbers represent the Q2 revenue collections and then the amount that was collected. So, for example, sales tax is up at the top, which you can see is this year at least our most predominant revenue source, and this does include use taxes. That's up at about 1.7, 1.8 million, basically somewhere between that 1.5 and $2 million amount, and that was $820,000 of that was in the second quarter. Utility taxes is our next largest revenue source, and that had collected about $320,000 in the second quarter. Licenses and permits, this is our business license renewal season, and you can see that in the trend. Very little collected in Q1. Most of that's collected in Q2, and we'll see a chunk of that as well in Q3. Property tax, sort of our licenses and permits, we have our heaviest collections in Q2 and Q3. Property tax, we see the most collections in Q4 and Q1. So very little regularity to how these revenues come in. The one exception probably is intergovernmental, which we generally expect to receive about the same amount every single quarter. That's the next highest revenue source at $130,000 collected in Q2. And then not terribly significant revenue sources behind that, fines and forfeitures, investment earnings, grants, and then just anything else that falls under the miscellaneous or other category, thinking of minor revenue sources. Moving on into just the various departmental activities, kind of reviewing what we've done in the last quarter. Obviously, Prop C, we had the voter education efforts in Q1. Q2, we had the election, and it was approved by voters. We revised our criminal code, granted a conditional use permit for Ernie Patty, site plan for Crestwood Appliance. That was they had some facade improvements, that overhang. We made application for the East-West Gateway Great Streets program, and Fortunately, we weren't selected, but we were encouraged to learn that we were in the second place selection for that grant, and so we feel confident that a subsequent application with some refinements, as long as somebody doesn't come in and steal the show, we might be successful next year in applying for that grant. We had a clean audit from our independent auditor, had the joint meeting with the Public Works Board, the Board of Aldermen to discuss sidewalk maintenance, and then we just wrapped up various boards and commissions code changes. Public Works, we had the contract for the new Public Works facility, selective slab replacement project is underway, various maintenance activities going on all around the city, cleaning brush, tree pruning, stump grinding, et cetera, et cetera. Finished up the masonry project at the Government Center at the end of May. At the bottom you can see a table with sewer lateral program data, 25 requests in Q2, 22 approved, and 18 repairs. Here are some other statistics. I apologize for the size of this. This will be available in PDF form on our website tomorrow for anyone that wants to review it in more detail, but we revamped our code enforcement statistical reporting, and so these are the new stats. The first 3 calls received regarding violations, staff identified violations, and the combined total of the 2. You see the asterisk under year-to-date. That's because we haven't had time to compile the year-to-date stats for that, but I anticipate that we'll have that ready in the future. So this just gives you a sense of the activity that's going on there. We'll monitor this to see what's going on in the community on an ongoing basis. In police, a variety of activities, accreditation process is underway. Crestwood Police Department started their own Facebook page. It's been very successful and well received. Speed trailer has been popular. Police is doing their ongoing garage door initiative, where after a burglary in 2016 where an entry was gained from an open garage door, police department began sending letters to residents who have open garage doors when they're open overnight, which seems quite irresponsible. But to date, almost 300 letters have been sent, so we're doing our best to make sure people close those doors and lock up. Chief Arnold put together a very good 3-part emergency operations plan review and tabletop simulation exercise for all city departments based on the comments from people who were attending. It was the first time in either a long time, if not ever, that Public Works and city planning and everyone was in the same room with fire and police, all coordinating on a simulated disaster. And for those curious, the simulation was it a fuel tanker, Chief, that had rolled off the side of I-44 right along next to roughly where like Spelman Park is. Yeah. And so, aside from the immediate disaster, the immediate emergency response, there's that creek, and there was concern about the fuel going down the creek and getting into the residential area, and what does that look like? So it was really good simulation. It was good to, sort of tackle some of the problems that we had covered in a simulated scenario rather than the real thing. And so now we're taking measures to improve that. Statistics, there's some interesting stuff in the numbers here. You can see Part 1 and Part 2 crimes compared by quarter to the same quarter last year. Here's an interesting trend. Look at traffic summons and traffic warnings. I believe this partially explains some of the decline in fines and forfeitures revenue. You can see in the second quarter of 2016, we issued roughly 1 traffic ticket per warning. In 2017, we're seeing that there are more warnings issued per traffic ticket. And so that ratio is kind of shifting. And again, I'm kind of attributing that to changing mentality as a result of municipal court reform. But we're also seeing that obviously impact on the bottom line. Every time we come to this point, I always point out, this is not a major revenue source for us, nor will it ever be, but nonetheless, it's something we monitor for operational impact. Then 911 calls, roughly within the margin of error there, no significant change. We're seeing a slight increase in the total call volume, nothing noteworthy or extreme there. In the fire department, they've been continuing their typical activities. Obviously, we had the addition of Fire Marshal Hecht, who has definitely brought his expertise as a fire marshal and already provided a significant amount of benefit, both to the city organization in terms of knowledge that he's passing on, as well as obviously to the community in that they're benefiting from his masterful knowledge of the subject matter, to be honest. And actually, at a forthcoming board meeting, we'll be bringing an update of our fire code and for the board's consideration. We completed our hydrant testing around the city. The crews completed an in-house fire behavior class. They viewed kind of a prop burning house and evaluated how smoke and ventilation of heat and gases moves through the building. Very interesting simulation there. Parks and Recreation held a number of quarry fishing events. We had the Aquatic Center kickoff. Easter egg scramble was well attended. They might be moving to the ball field because they've had to accommodate the significant growth there. And obviously the summer playhouse is underway. City Clerk's office, we had a visit from a state public records archive specialist. They reviewed our document storage practices, including basement, long-term storage. We're trying to get some of that under control, considering looking at going to digital, getting those things more accessible. We received some input regarding grant opportunities to help us do a better job there. But by and large, they said, we've seen a heck of a lot worse. You guys are in pretty good shape, and that was encouraging to hear. And then you can see some of the statistics there. No noteworthy outliers, I think, in the quarterly numbers, the year-to-date numbers. Do we have any questions about Q2?
Alderman McGill?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm looking at the report for the general fund, and let's see, if I understood you correctly, Mr. Simpson, you mentioned, did you say the numbers, the sales tax numbers include $60,000 in use taxes?
No, I believe what you heard is sales taxes are down about $60,000 for Q2. Yeah, if you're comparing, let me see here. Second quarter sales and use taxes was $818. Second quarter in 2016 was $878. That's a difference of $60,000. But that $818 in Q2 2017 includes use tax revenues.
The $818 includes use taxes.
So if you remove the use tax from this and you're just comparing sales taxes to sales taxes, it goes down.
And do you have the amount of use taxes in that 818 or year to date?
Do you know, or at least a rough idea, Rick?
Through June 30th, through that report, $93,000 in use tax.
$93,000 in use tax? Okay.
Through June 30th.
Mm-hmm.
So $93,000 in new use taxes. And year to date on sales tax in this report is down about $96,000, right? $1,795 versus $1,891. So add another 90 to that, or deficit, and we're really down $180,000 on an apples-to-apples basis.
I believe that would be an accurate statement, yeah.
Okay. Are we reporting that number in the monthly report?
Sales tax?
The new use tax, is that in the...
The use tax, the monthly report you all receive is the sales tax numbers.
And that includes the new use taxes?
No.
Could we add that as a line item for the general fund?
If you would like separate reporting on the use tax, I believe we can do that. We're running low on space on that, but yeah, we could add use tax to that as a separate line.
As a line item, we could compress the print.
Sure. Okay. We'll get to a magnifying glass.
And I realize there's no year-to-date comparison versus last year, but still, I'd really like to see that breakout so we can track that number. That's really the only thing that jumped out at me, other than what you've already covered. Thank you very much. Good report.
Okay.
Excuse me, let me just add. May I just add one thing then?
Go ahead.
I noticed that the estimate in the general fund for the sales tax revenue, no, wait a minute. Yeah. the budget in the general fund is greater than the actual for last year. And
If you want to change the way, if you want to change categories, if you want to add something else, if you want to take something away, if when we get through scoring all of these projects, you're not happy with the end result, well, let's have a conversation about why the end result wasn't what you expected it to be and come up with some recommendations to get there. But what this will really help us do is plan for those future large expenditures. Because the way we go right now, we don't have a good idea today what capital projects are going to be funded next year. We do have a good idea of that, say in November and December, when we're pretty much into the budget set process and the budget is more or less set. So that means that someone like Jim, who's got to prepare some very detailed and research-heavy bid specifications, probably could do a little bit of preliminary research prior to that November timeline, but a lot of that has to start and get going in earnest after that. And then you've got to go out to bid. That takes 30 or 45 or 60 days. And then when we get the bids back, it's got to go in the Board of Aldermen calendar. And you all might have questions or might get pushed off a meeting. And before you know it, it's May, and we're just now finally giving the approval to proceed to the contractor. A program, a CIP, will give us greater certainty about what's happening in future years. And that will allow us to start doing some of that pre-preparation research before the fiscal year starts. And obviously, what we've heard time and again from this board is we want to see our capital projects that are funded in the current fiscal year, completed in the current fiscal year. This is something that will help us get there. All right, I've talked enough. Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. And as he mentioned, tonight I'll be walking you through the proposed capital improvements plan for the city of Crestwood. So at tonight's meeting, we will have the CIP presentation and then any questions or comments you may have. And then at the next meeting on August 8th, staff will submit a resolution for board approval. So a capital improvement program is a 5-year plan that outlines the goals and objectives for capital projects. The plan would include a summary of the capital improvements, estimated costs, a schedule for improvements, and their sources for funding. So here on this slide, you will see the CIP definition flowchart. So this is the process that outlines the requirements needed for a project to be included in the CIP. It must meet the following requirements, which is cost must exceed $15,000. It must provide at least 5 years of benefit, and it must be a significant improvement or addition to the city's fixed assets. Some of these examples would include buildings, improvements other than buildings, sidewalks, curbs and gutters, streetlights, and the rest listed up there. So once a project is deemed eligible and is included in the CIP, it will be ranked using this ranking system and score sheet. And then later on in the presentation, we will actually walk through a hypothetical project being scored using this system here. So now we're going to take a look at the CIP ranking criteria. The following slides will include 7 criteria that we have come up with that we're going to use to rank the individual projects. On this slide, you see the first criteria, which is project need, and then included is a summary and the scoring scale for this criteria. Then we have timing and location and its scoring scale as well. Some questions you would ask for project need is if the project addresses a significant maintenance need or if it addresses a work environment issue. The next slide, you'll see the next 2 criteria. The third one being board and commission priority, and then the fourth one being comprehensive plan, master plans. Projects that have become a high priority of the BOA, Parks Board, or Public Works Board would score high in this category. Projects that are included in the city's comprehensive plan or Crestwood master plan would score high in that category. And then you have the next criteria, the impact on operational budget. This is the 5th category, and it looks at the project's effect on the operational budget. And then the 6th category is infrastructure, and it relates to the infrastructure needs for the city. If the project would actually generate revenue or have significant savings, it would score high in the impact on operational budget category. But if it would have a negative effect on the budget, it would score low. And then the last one is external funding. This one's a little different because it takes the actual percentage that if the project receives external funding through a grant or some other source, it takes the percentage of external funding it's receiving, and that's how it determines how many points it scores in this category. So now we will rate a hypothetical project using the steps I just discussed. Tonight's example, we'll look at a bridge replacement project. And keep in mind this is hypothetical. I don't think there are any bridges in Crestwood. So this slide, you will see a summary of the hypothetical bridge replacement background. The information I have included aligns with the criteria, just so you can get a good idea of how we would actually go through rating a project. So for this particular example, we're replacing a bridge that's in need of complete repair. It is utilized by 10,000 vehicles per day. The Board of Aldermen have listed it as a top priority. The project will improve pedestrian usage by adding walkways on both sides. Staff has secured a state grant that will fund 30% of the cost. And the bridge replacement will address existing infrastructure. On this slide, we have that diagram that was shown earlier with the actual scores filled in for the project. For project need, staff gave it a 5 because it addresses a need with a serious risk and liability issue. For external funding, it received 2 points because costs from the state grant will cover 30% of the total cost. For timing and location, it scored a 5. Because the bridge current traffic counts are at 15,000 vehicles per day. For board and commission priority, it received a 4 because the Board of Aldermen ranked the project as a top priority for 2018. For comp plan, it received a 5 because it aligns with the goals set forth in the city's comp plan. For impact and operational budget, it scored a 3 because it has a neutral impact. The maintenance for the new walkway and the lighting will be offset by the maintenance repair savings that we're receiving for building a new bridge, or replacing the bridge, I should say. And then for infrastructure, it was scored a 5 because it addresses existing infrastructure. Now you'll see here the actual scores for the projects have been multiplied by the category weight given to each criteria. So certain criteria are weighted higher than others given their need and their, in the whole program itself. So out of 75 possible points, this project would receive a CIP score of 63. Any questions?
And just to illustrate, since that was just one project, we would do that for every single capital project that's sort of in our to-do list. We would then have a ranked list with a score associated from it, and then as funding is available in the annual budget, we would fund projects starting at the highest ranked project going down until we didn't have any funding left or until the board didn't approve any further funding. So that's kind of how we would use this going forward, and then we would know, okay, we're getting the top 10 projects done in 2018, while the next 10 projects would most likely be able to be funded in 2019, giving us that future certainty. So coming at the first meeting in August, as Sarah mentioned, will be a resolution so that the board could approve this plan, and that would be a good time if you had any changes to make, since you all probably want to take this and reflect on it. That would be a good time to make any changes, if any, to the parameters by which the program operates.
Although your example was hypothetical, it seems to me that it would apply to the replacement of the Whitecliff Park Bridge, which engineers have indicated will need to be replaced in a few years. So, good job. Alderman, maybe?
I have my light on to discuss a couple of things I thought we could tweak on this, but it sounds like Mr. Simpson wants to wait until August for that.
Yeah, that was nice.
Okay.
Okay.
I have nothing then.
Okay. Alderman Anderson?
Thank you. I wasn't quite clear. So let's take, for instance, the impact on operational budget. There are 5 categories or numbers there. And so if the project got let's say a 5, how would then, what do you multiply the 5 by the weighted by the 2? Is that how you would get that? So it'd be a maximum of 10 points for 10?
That's correct. So
Okay.
for the impact on the operational budget, the maximum weighted points is 10.
Okay.
But for project need, for example, that's weighted 4, the maximum points would be 20.
20.
Correct.
So consider the weighting of the various factors and how they interrelate. I mean, we intentionally gave a project, and so we felt that that should be given additional weight. But maybe external funding ought to be given more weight. That's up for you all to decide.
Thanks.
All right. See no further lights. Thank you so much for the presentation. Alderman Miguel?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sorry.
On the point that was just mentioned, relative to the budget, I don't know how I don't quite understand how you're going to measure impact.
So,
I mean, is it the complete? You can have projects, one 100,000, another 500,000, another $1 million. Is it just the amount of dollars, or what? How do you?
the key element is impact on operational budget. Are we replacing something, like let's say we were going to build another community center and we had to add 15 staff. That has an impact on the operational budget.
I got it.
If it's going to be, if it's something that we've been maintaining, it's been, costing us a lot of money, and something brand new would not have, then that would probably be more like a 4 or a 5.
Okay, that is the context of operation. How do you avoid or prevent clustering? In other words, everything coming around that 63 number, when you have a number of different projects. I've seen this type of scoring or rating used with personnel plans. And the tendency that I've seen is everybody comes in above average. So how do you prevent clustering when you're looking at projects?
Well, there are a couple of objective factors that I think will result in a significant spread. The first would be sources of external funding. Not every project is going to be awarded a 60 to 80% grant and therefore get 4 points there. Some projects are going to have no external funding, and so that is going to impact your overall score. Another one is going to be board and commission priority. What staff intends to do going forward, were the board to signal their support for this program, is we would ask the various boards, including this board, to rank their top 5 highest priority projects. All other factors, forget about everything, or consider everything else, I guess. But however we do it, this board and the Public Works Board and the Parks Board will come up with their top 5. And those will then be scored on the board and commission priority factor based on whether or not it's on that top 5 list or not. If it's on this board, but Public Works and Parks disagree, then it's a 4. If this board says it's a top 5 project and Parks Board says it's top 5, then it gets 5. If neither this board or any of the advisory boards rated as a top 5 project, then it's 1 or a 0. A 1.
Yeah, you can't rate it. It has to have at least 1 point
So
each
it would be a
project.
1. So there are some opportunities there for just built-in, it is or it isn't, and that's going to result, I think, in some of the spread.
Okay.
But certainly, yeah, we're gonna seek to you know, if the program does come back and everything's like a 60 to 65 and we can't make any sort of decisions, then we got to tweak the program.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the one area that I kind of wondered about, so maybe something to think about, is the stormwater area. That's been around in the planning stage ever since I can remember. Yet nothing ever gets done about it, or very little ever gets done on it. So I'm kind of wondering where something like that might wind up on the story. So, and that's kind of in line with that clustering thing, because, well, I guess maybe that's where after you have everything evaluated, stored, then you kind of look at the spread, perhaps. Okay. Very good, thank you.
Mr. Simpson, you, I mean, based on the questions that have been asked by Alderman Miguel and Alderman Anderson, do you think we need a work session before the next meeting resolution to go over fine points of this, or do you believe that you can do it through just answering questions that, as the board?
If the board wants to hold a work session, we certainly can on this topic. I mean, I think the system is relatively uncomplicated, and you know, a resolution is not an ordinance. It's not going to bind you. If we adopt this by resolution in August, and then we get to the budget cycle in October and November, and you all are like, "This is terrible," there's nothing stopping you from doing what you want.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just thought, you know, from the standpoint of learning more about what the project and the program, how it actually functions, and you know, how it's designed to operate might be.
That's pretty much it. It's intended to be simple.
Okay. All right. Alderman Waller?
Yeah, just briefly again, Alderman Miguel brings up a good point in regards to stormwater projects, because again, I'm a liaison on the Parks Board. We really talk about parks items and not really stormwater, although that's the other leg of it with regards to that sales tax. So maybe some guidance from Chris in regards to what commission really should talk about for stormwater projects, whether it's public works or whether it's parks. So I think just give some thought. Regards to the weighting, I think thanks in regards to the weight that you provide the boards and commissions, I think that's going to go a long way. At least it gives the boards and commission members some weight, some thought process as we select these projects in the future. And the other question I have is in regards to the $15,000 cost, and maybe this might be directed to Chris. Is that $15,000 threshold meant for any item in the capital improvement budget? That it must be a $15,000 project in which that item to fulfill the budget? Because there were some areas in the past where that $15,000 amount does not meet that criteria. So I just want to know what the purpose or the emphasis of that $15,000 mark is.
That's for inclusion in the capital improvement plan. Doesn't necessarily mean that it would be included in the capital improvement fund. So we would, if something was, say, $5,000, we could still fund that out of the capital improvement fund. It really would be funded anywhere as long as it was of the proper use. It's going to be parks and stormwater. It's related to parks and stormwater, but yeah, it's not meant to be exclusionary and say only $15,000 items are in the capital improvement fund. But we're not going to score and go through the ranking process and have that compete against $400,000, $500,000 selective slab replacements. So I do think, and I've had conversations with Mr. Jett on this topic, that you probably do need to adopt a definition of something that's appropriate to fund out of the capital improvement fund. Most cities go with a $5,000 threshold and everything else is out of general, but that's not what this is intended to.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. Anything further? Okay. All right. Thank you again. See no further lights. Appreciate your comments. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the public hearing. This will be a public hearing and ordinance approving a franchise agreement with Union Electric Company doing business as Ameren, Missouri, authorizing Ameren to maintain, operate, and use all equipment, facilities, devices, and materials in the city's rights-of-way to provide electricity and other public purposes, and authorizing the mayor and the city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city.
It's to section 11 of the proposed franchise agreement, striking through the language that says the company acknowledges that nothing in the agreement shall relieve the company of any obligation to pay the gross receipts tax on the business of supplying or furnishing electricity, electric power, or electric service within the city pursuant to any valid lawful ordinance of the city imposing such tax, and in lieu of the struck through language inserting, quote, company acknowledges that it is subject to section 2545 of the municipal code of the city of Crestwood, and it is required thereunder to pay to the city an amount equal to 5.7% of the gross receipts derived from residential subscribers within the city, and a license or occupational tax of 7% of the gross receipts derived from commercial subscribers within the city, open parenthetical, or such percentages as may hereinafter be approved by the citizens of Crestwood, close parenthetical, and that nothing in this agreement relieves company of its obligations under section 2545 of the municipal code of the city of Crestwood, end quote. My understanding is the city attorney has ran this by Ambryn's attorney, and they are not opposed to the proposed amendment.
And I will confirm that, ask city attorney to confirm that, please.
That's correct. We have discussed it with them, and they are fine with the change.
Okay. And everyone tonight received a copy of that amendment to this ordinance.
I'll second that.
Okay. So we have a motion for approval of the amendment. You seconded it. I didn't hear anybody.
I made a motion.
Okay. And Alderman Wallach seconded. Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Let's take a roll call, please.
Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
Alderman McGowan?
Yes.
Alderman Wallach?
Yes.
Alderman Anderson? Alderman
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Yes.
Alderman Maybe?
Yes.
Alderman Reed?
Yes.
6 ayes, the motion has passed.
Okay. All right. So with the amended ordinance, do I have a motion and a second for the first reading?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. May I have a bill number, please?
1727. Was that moved by Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
And second.
Give that to Alderman Maybe, please. Alderman Maybe, if you do the honors, since your lights on.
Yes, sir. Bill number 1727, introduced by Alderman Maybe. An ordinance approving a franchise agreement with Union Electric Company, DBA, Ambryn, Missouri, authorizing Ambryn to maintain, operate, and use all equipment, facilities, devices, and materials in the city's rights-of-way to provide electricity and other public purposes, and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Alderman McGowan?
Yes.
Alderman Wallach?
Yes.
Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
Alderman Maybe?
Yes.
Alderman Reed?
Yes.
Alderman Anderson?
Yes.
6 ayes, the motion has passed.
Okay. As I said, we'll hold the second reading over for the next meeting. Okay. That's it on the public hearings. The next item on the agenda is the mayor and board of aldermen and city administrator reports and or comments. Alderman Breedy?
No report.
Alderman Wallach?
I do have a report. Thank you, Your Honor. Last Tuesday, on the 17th, we had a park board meeting. For the community center as of June, through the end of June, the revenue, so 252 passes, which brought in roughly $74,141 revenue. That's related to the community center. Then for the month of June, the community center had 53 active classes, 869 participants, which brought in a revenue of $14,939. Again, there's been the event with regards to the Playhouse, which again, those 3 events, which were already passed, but well attended. Included the Wizard of Oz in June 15th or 18th, the Addams Family, and then Into the Woods. Again, this past weekend also, there was the Sappington House event for the craft fair. It looks like it'd be well attended, but I think it was all about how everyone attended there. Upcoming events is a free concert at the White Cliff Center, the Lunar Levitation Concert on Saturday, July 29th from 6:30 to 8:30. The alternative pool party at the pool on August 4th. And for those camps, again, the Little Veterinarian School Camp for ages 5 through 9, that's for the week of August the 7th. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. We did have a police board meeting on Monday evening, the 17th. In that meeting, the Chief Arnoldi gave the monthly police reports with the crime statistics. Just a quick reminder there, those are available on the city's website. For those of you that have questions, we can definitely point you in the right direction, but they are available on the city's website. Went over that we continue to go through the Missouri Police Chief's accreditation process. We did lose a couple of longstanding officers. However, as you all saw earlier this evening, we did also hire new officers. A lot of these individuals have become highly qualified, so it's great to have the new individuals on force with us. The Sally Board project has started, and then also all of the newly purchased vehicles are in and up and running and out, so out patrolling. So that is a wrap up of most of the business. The only other couple things to add is we did have the two newest board members got to come to their first meeting because we were off in June. And then also there is a fundraiser this Friday evening at down at Pole Position Raceway. It's called Hot Pursuit. It's the Crestwood Police Department officers are holding a fundraiser to benefit the Special Olympics. It's going to be a cool event. You can go down and race, interact with officers, maybe see what it's like to have a high-speed chase, but not on the city streets, of course. So they'll be participating in some racing. It'll be a good event for all ages. And that's my report.
Great. Thank you. Alderman Maybe?
All I had was to echo Alderman Charbonneau's request to attend, this Friday's Hot Pursuit event down at Pole Position and get to lawfully race officers.
Alderman Gale?
No report, Your Honor.
All right. Alderman Anderson?
No report.
All right. City Attorney?
No report this evening.
Okay. City Administrator?
Just briefly, for those who weren't aware, the city has finished hiring and filling the manager of recreation position. So if you're over at the community center, go and say hi to Eileen Ramirez and welcome her to the city. We're happy to have her.
Okay. Alderman Wall, did you have something else?
I did, for the park board.
Actually, August, if I mentioned this, August 5th is Rayburn Park is again another meeting with the residents there. That's on Saturday at 9 o'clock. Again, hopefully get some final details from what the residents want, and then we'll be in the position, at least from the staff side, to make a presentation to the board as to the capital improvement or the park needs for that particular park.
Okay. Thank you. And I have no report. All right. We'll move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is public comment. Individuals wishing to speak may do so on topics on or off of the agenda for this evening. And if you would, please limit your comments to 5 minutes. Anyone on this side care to speak? Yes, ma'am? And if you would, please state your name and the address for the record.
Sure. It's Martha Duchild, 9158 General Grant Lane, and I would like to ask for the board's attention, please.
I'd like to ask the board what, ma'am?
Attention. Thank you. First, I would like to ask that the board withdraw its lawsuit against the Acton Fire Protection District and the state's governor and the state's attorney general. Second, I'd like to read from the page from the 2017 budget introduction, referring to this Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association. The city made the following statement. Financial transparency and public trust are essential components of good government, and pursuing this recognition helps to signal to the public that Crestwood is a responsible steward of public money. Based on the city's recent investment of taxpayer dollars, either directly or as foregone taxes, into multiple high-risk ventures, including a restaurant startup, a commercial real estate investment, lawsuits, as well as parks projects that have been initiated but then shelved indefinitely. The signal the city is sending to the public is that despite its obligation as a public fiduciary, it is behaving more like a venture capitalist. Public trust must be earned every day, and the more the city keeps stonewalling and responding to inquiries, the more deeply that trust erodes. What is the purpose in providing documents in response to sunshine law requests if you, as public servants, are unwilling to answer legitimate questions which arise as a result of reviewing those documents? In June, Mayor Roby promised that the city would get back to me regarding the questions I had on the lapse of the Horner and Schifrin contract. The response I received was a refusal to answer my questions. In refusing to respond to my questions, Mr. Simpson also refused to take ownership of the decisions his administration has made. This does not engender public trust. In fact, what it does is create public suspicion. Compounding this is the failure to release the votes on the decision to sue the Acton Fire Protection District. There are 4 aldermen, half the board, up for re-election in April. This administration owes it to the public to let us know whether our aldermen supported committing significant amounts of our money to a lawsuit whose outcome is uncertain at best and whose success is not favorably viewed by all residents in the annexed area. To help move forward and restore trust, I will present the mayor and city administrator tonight with an opportunity to answer 2 very straightforward questions. The first, reviewing the legal bills, entries related to the Acton Fire Protection District lawsuit began in November of 2016. On whose authority was the decision to ask Lashley and Baird to begin research on a potential lawsuit made?
We'll get back to you on that. This is public comment. I've told you numerous times, Mr. Duchow, we do not take questions here tonight or any meeting for public comment because I'm not going to put any member of this administration on the spot to answer you with an inaccurate response. We don't have a pile of information sitting here in front of us, as you can see.
I am asking you questions that certainly are not difficult, and based on memory, you would be very well able to answer. I have been able to do this with previous administrations, and this is the first administration that has told me, we'll get back to you, and in getting back to me, you refuse to answer my questions. So you leave me with no choice but to answer in public.
Do you have your questions prepared on paper?
I have them right here, yes.
Okay, would you present them to the city clerk then? And we will then get back to you with that, with those answer on those questions, okay?
And I will give you my second question. And I also would like a commitment from both of you that you will actually answer my questions rather than tell me you refuse to answer.
We have answered your questions.
No, you did not answer my questions.
Did you not send me an email?
I did.
And did you not get a response back?
Mr. Simpson said
No, I asked you, did you not get a response back from me?
You did not answer my questions. I had questions and you said, we will get back to you. Most people would take that to mean that there will be a response, and the response would not be, I'm done answering your questions on this issue. They are legitimate questions, and I am up here out of frustration because this administration is keeping information from the public. I am more than willing to submit my questions to you,
please.
But in return, as a taxpayer, and you as a public servant, have an obligation to respond. The questions that I am asking do not put the city in any legal jeopardy. So my second question to continue. Do either of you agree that the $600,000 forecasted revenue from Prop B and the projected $1.2 million from Prop C are more than enough to cover annual payments to the Acton Fire Protection District? You can answer now, or I will submit it.
We haven't received anything from Prop P.
Mr. Simpson has made projections. That's
Those
what you
projections were
projected.
made by St. Louis County.
Mr.
They were provided to
Simpson-
all let me finish. They were provided to all municipalities throughout the county after the county calculated what each municipality would get based on their population. Those were not numbers that Mr. Simpson pulled out of the air. Those were numbers that were provided by St. Louis County to every municipality in St. Louis County after the county took their 46% off of the 80 million. So we have not received one penny from that. We will not until probably sometime the end of this year, the beginning of next year. It depends on, county's going to collect it, but it depends on when they decide to disseminate that tax money. And so I can answer your question right now and tell you that, no, I can't give you a positive answer because I don't know how much I'm going to get. I may not get anything from Prop B.
And what about the numbers that Mr. Simpson provided for
6
Prop
minutes,
C?
Your Honor.
Yes.
6 minutes, Your Honor.
I'm sorry?
6 minutes.
Okay, but I'm asking questions of her
Prop-
too, so I've interrupted her and I'll let...
Prop C, Mr. Simpson did provide forecasted numbers for Prop C. Based on real estate property taxes, you provided a number. Is that correct at your presentations for in anticipation of Prop C? You provided the public with anticipated revenues from Prop C.
There's a legislative decision that the board has to make related to that still. So we don't know.
I understand the ceiling, but in anticipation that you receive those revenues, would $600,000 in revenue be enough to cover that annual payment?
I'm going to interject for just a minute because if you want to ask them about and have questions about Prop C and about Prop P, that's fine. But we are in active litigation with the Acton Fire Protection District. And because of that, I don't think that they ought to be discussing in a public meeting specifically whether or not that's sufficient to make those payments. So I would say, I would advise them as their attorney not to answer that question in the meeting.
And that would have been my response to you in writing or in phone call or text to your question. I'm not going to discuss, nor am I going to expect any member of this board to discuss anything with regards to the Acton Fire Protection District, period.
These are strictly numbers. I accept your answer, and I am just letting you know that every time that you cover up with this, it erodes public trust. Thank you.
Well, I will say too that you were not being truthful with the public here tonight when you said I didn't respond to you. You did send me a question regarding this issue we just now talked about, and we sent you a response back for that. And it came from our legal counsel, so don't say that we didn't respond back.
That was not, you're referring to a different question. I had a series of 6 questions that went unanswered.
But you mentioned here that, yes, I did not respond back to you.
It was those questions.
Okay. I'm glad you made that clear. Thank you. Anyone else on this side care to speak? I see no further hands. Anyone on this side care to speak? Yes, sir.
This meeting was 8915 Rosden Lane. Just a quick note about...
Could you speak up, please, sir? Thank you.
Just a quick note about live streaming tonight. Last month we started doing this. I'm not going to tell you that every 2 weeks, but just because today it's different. We had a different setup last month, and I want to publicly say thank you to you, Mayor, Aldermen Mary, and City Administrator Simpson for donating to the project that I put on Facebook. I raised some money to buy a streaming device to be able to stream online on YouTube those Board of Aldermen meetings. And without your help, it wouldn't be possible to do that tonight. It works very well. I just got some comments saying that the video was very good, the sound as well. So I think we're bringing some transparency and trying to have people more involved and interested in what's going on in their cities. I would encourage the Board of Aldermen and the administration to eventually take a look in the long term at a better audio system and video system for the city. I mean, it's fine right now. I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy that, but eventually it might be better to have a professional system. So maybe the board wants one day to take a look at that, and we've got some money and I'm an IT professional, so I'm always happy to help if you need any help. I just want to say that tonight, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I will say that this was welcome. We weren't sure we were going to have a audio recording of tonight. We've been having problems with the equipment, which is quite old, that records our audio for our meetings here, and at least this way we have something that's recorded. But it appears that the equipment is working tonight, although we're not sure for how long. So, okay. Anyone else on this side care to speak? I see no other hands. Okay, so we will end public comment and move on to the next item, which is old business. And under old business, we have the discussion of fire department overtime and cost analysis. Mr. Simpson, do you want to start this, or is this going to be Chief Oliveri?
Well, it might be some of me, some of Chief Oliveri, and some of Mr. Jett. Obviously, we refer to the memorandum in the packet for tonight. This is following the discussion at the last Board of Aldermen meeting. Staff, we got together and kind of asked some questions. What's the true cost of adding personnel? And then what does that look like operationally if we had someone that was floating amongst the various firefighting crews in order to help take some of the overtime shifts that we're seeing. And you can read in more detail in the memorandum itself. I think the most illustrative chart is on what's page 39 of the packet, or maybe page 2 of the memo, and that's chart B. What you're seeing here is the number of overtime shifts, and then the number of those bars over the last several years, including an estimate for 2017. And then the line going across at 85 is the number of shifts that we expect that new employee would have to pick up in order for it to be a break-even or better scenario. So, in 2014, if the hypothetical floating employee were able to pick up 85 overtime shifts out of 93 possible overtime shifts, then that would be a break-even. And as you can see, the last year and this year, we're seeing overtime shifts approach 200 per year. And for your average firefighter, your full-time position, they have the ability to pick up 120 shifts. So we're essentially looking at 85 shifts out of a possible 120 in order to make it a break-even or better scenario. And if they came up short of that, then it would be, okay, maybe it doesn't make the most sense from a cost-benefit analysis just from an overtime perspective. So, I don't know, Chief, is there anything you would like to add to that at this point, any details that we covered?
I think the memo is fairly comprehensive. I would like the board to know that Mr. Simpson, Mr. Jett, and myself met for approximately 2 hours on this issue. It took us about 90 minutes to come to a conclusion. We spent the other 30 minutes kind of breaking it down a couple of different ways to try to really just be as accurate as possible, to try to give the members of the board the best, most accurate picture of A, what it would cost, B, how much overtime we thought that additional position could cover, and then to arrive at the conclusion of, does it appear that it would not only pay for itself, but also provide the potential for some cost savings. So after that initial meeting, Mr. Jett and myself met one other time for approximately an hour, trying to refine the costs, which is what you see in the memo in front of you, and that I've included the base salary figure, but then also the total compensation figure, which includes everything in the benefit package, but also the city's portion of employment taxes and everything. And then some members of the board may notice that when we compared that to the cost of the overtime, that those costs are listed higher than what is in the line item of the fire department budget for overtime. But that's because the line item budget only includes the hourly rate, not a benefit factor involved in that. So that's why those figures are elevated slightly over what is listed in the line item, because it was our attempt to give a as much of a true, accurate picture as we could as to what every cost the city has or incurs in not only the positions, but also in the filling of that overtime. So, at this point, I don't really have anything additional to add, but I'm more than willing to answer any questions that the members of the board may have.
Alderman Maybe?
I read through the memo. It was extremely detailed, and I think it was, to me, it answered most of the questions the board was posing at our last meeting in that discussion, so the memo is very appreciated. When we're doing the cost benefit here, and we have the cost per shift on the overtime rate, and then what the potential new position would fill, have we already factored in that I think you indicated last time that some of the overtime shifts were being filled by people that weren't just firefighter paramedics, not that there was higher ranking individuals sometimes had to cover those shifts?
That is correct. And basically what we attempted to do was to come up with a cost average that was as accurate as possible, that even applied to more than 1 year. So for example, when we came up with an average cost of the overtime, we did it for what it cost us year to date for 2017, but then I also went back and ran the figures for 2016 and 2015, and they're within a couple of dollars of that amount. You know, there are so many variables that go into that, as far as when the overtime hits, what crews it's on, which employee may be at the top of the overtime list, and whether that employee takes it or not. So it made it very difficult, honestly, to feel confident that we had a good estimate. So it was kind of why we arrived at kind of breaking it down the way we did, and just doing it by an average, and then trying to verify that average over more than just this year.
Okay, and right now, and it's kind of retreading ground we covered last time, but there's one long-term vacancy right now that's going to cover a good chunk of the rest of the year. And so I guess operationally, if the board approves this new position, you would likely just plug that individual in on that particular shift?
Yes, that is correct. The one thing that makes the remainder of 2017 unique is I have information of, I know how many expected vacancies we're going to have. Or I'll say I have a minimum number that I am 100% convinced that we are going to have, is probably the best way to put it. So by plugging a new employee into that, my estimate was approximately 86 open shifts, or 86 shifts of overtime available for the rest of the year. So it was easy for us to take that new employee, and if he's going to work 45 shifts between now and the end of the year, we could easily take that 45 off of that 86. Now, moving forward for 2018 and 2019, that's information I don't have. So that's where the uncertainty does come in. You know, the one thing I can say is that since the original discussion at the last board meeting, as well as my preparation of this memo, I did find out that we have 3 more of our employees who are, whose wives are expecting and who are going to be expanding their families. So based on the rules of family medical leave, they have the option, or they have the ability to request leave of up to 12 weeks each. So, and that is really what we're dealing with right now with the one long-term vacancy on our B crew. So yes, I know for a fact that 12-week vacancy is going to cost us between 22 and 23 overtime shifts. I can immediately plug this new employee or this float position into that shift, and it automatically covers those 22 or 23 shifts.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't it, would it be appropriate or possible to ask those firemen ahead of time if they're planning on taking that 12 weeks, so we have some idea as to you know, what we need to do moving forward?
Yes, and I have had preliminary discussions at this point. I think the unknown factor that makes it difficult for even them to predict is whether there are any type of complications or not, and whether there are any medical issues that arise, because that of course, completely changes the answer.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Waller?
Yeah, thank you. Again, Chief, yeah, very well documented. But if you could give me some education in regards to the staff, again, the years you provided us, the overtime budget for 2013 was $85,000. Projected overtime but for 2017 is $183,000. Has this number of staff been consistent through 2013 through 2017?
It has.
Okay. I know you're recommending, or at least there's a recommendation of a full-time employee. Are we able to secure part-time employees, 2 or 3 part-time employees, to fill in the gaps that's needed on an ongoing basis?
Under our current agreement with the firefighters union, we are not permitted to hire part-time employees. We are only allowed to address the vacancies in 2 ways. 1, through overtime of existing employees, or 2, through an additional full-time position. Now, there is the caveat that the full-time position can be a temporary full-time position, but those are the only 2 ways under the current bargaining agreement that we can cover the openings.
Then would you recommend that the board consider a temporary position, full-time position, or a regular employee for the staff?
Well, I'm actually recommending a permanent full-time position, and it really, the first part is it's based on our history over the last 4 years. And one of the questions I posed in our meeting with myself, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Jett, was at what point do we acknowledge what I called our new normal and what our new normal overtime usage is. Historically, I used data from even prior to 2013 when I requested a budget amount for overtime, but it seems to me that the data shows and the data supports that that formula that I use is no longer accurate. So based on that and based on what has occurred over a 4-year period, I'm confident that we can use that position. We may not be able to fully recoup all of the cost of that position on a year-to-year basis as we go forward, but I'm very confident that we can recoup a large portion of that total cost just based on our overtime usage of the last 4 years. The other factor that we did discuss was in the hiring of a temporary employee. Because of the licenses and certifications and education required in order to be a paramedic firefighter, we typically run into individuals who are in their mid-20s to mid-30s. Those folks typically have other full-time jobs, and based on my discussions with some of our neighboring fire departments, hiring a temporary employee can be somewhat problematic, because basically you're asking an individual to give up his permanent full-time position to take a position with the city of Crestwood that may only last for a few months, 3 months, 4 months, maybe even 6 months. And then at that point they would be in a position that they would then be let go. So they have to then balance that out with their family needs of whether they want to take a full-time position with our fire department to potentially then be unemployed in X number of days or X number of months. So the status of the overtime usage over the last 4 years, plus the difficulties in putting on a temporary position, is what led us, I believe, to, if I can use the word unanimous, conclusion that this is probably the best way we need to move forward.
Okay. But is it your recommendation, is it your thoughts though, that if the contract that we had in place with the fire department had included part-time employees, would you then recommend it to the staff, to the city, retaining part-time employees for that position?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again, please?
Again, I recognize pursuant to your discussion, again, I didn't let my look at the labor contract. You indicated again, based upon the contract in place and maybe the city attorney, that we're prohibited from hiring part-time employees. From what you're saying, we can only hire temporary full-time employees for a full-time employee for the fire department.
Yes, that is correct.
Is it your recommendation then, at the next round of contract talks, that the city consider including part-time employees in the contract, allow the city that option? And again, if I'm talking about something that's something, talk about labor talks, we can talk about that at another time.
I believe it's something that we should certainly discuss and bring up as part of the negotiations to see whether we can come to an agreement with the firefighters union in that area. But I think that at least on face value, you know, there's certainly potential for benefit to the city.
Right. Well, one of my concerns again, projected is $183,000 in overtime. Although that's good for the staff or the employees that want that overtime, but also it's to me that's demanding from our limited staff that we have, and it puts a strain on the staff, not only the employees but also the management level to retain that. So I think there just needs to be some leeway, because again, that just puts a strain on both ways, not only the city for the funding, but also the employees and the amount of time that they have to put into it as well. Okay.
Alderman Sharpman.
Yes, I believe Chief has answered my question and answering Alderman Walk's questions. I was just, in the memo, just references that this position would be for the remainder of the year 2017, but I do believe Chief is also recommending that this would be a future position to maintain, so he answered my question. That's all you're on.
All right, thank you. And I think what he's asking us tonight is to give the city administrator the ability to move forward with another firefighter to finish out this year, and then for the board to cover any overtime expenses that may be necessary for the future of 2017. I mean, I think you've already reported that we've already reached our overtime budget for this year.
That is correct, and to be honest, at this point, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 over what the annual or what the budget line item was for overtime for 2017. Now, I think as I explained in the last board meeting, where we would cover that amount from out of the current fire department budget was out of the open salaries that were not used for the first half of the year. But we really are at a critical point to where we need to have a decision made as to which way we're going to go forward, because obviously we can't continue down this path without some direction from the board of how we want to address the problem now and long term, but then also direction from the board as to what they're comfortable with in a budget adjustment, you know, for that overtime item for the rest of the year.
Well, I mean, we've got to cover it. I mean, I don't know where else it's going to come from if it doesn't, you know, if the board doesn't approve your overtime expenses or for employees. So, okay. All right, Alderman, maybe you were next, and if we can get to the point here, I think that, you know, we've got two issues before us. I think this has been laid out very well, and I don't know how many more questions we have.
I don't know. Well, I guess first of all, a quick question from the city administrator. Are you just looking for a voice vote from us tonight to approve this course of action, or what are you looking for from the board tonight?
Yeah, I suppose that would be appropriate. We'll be coming with a budget amendment later on, maybe a meeting or two from now, related to this. Obviously, it'll be necessary to adjust the overtime budget, even if you approve the floater, but we'll also need a budget amendment for the...
Sure. And I thought we talked about that the last time, and there was general agreement to maintain staffing on the trucks and to do that. No, I think the memo lays out clearly that there is a certainty that the city will save money in in 2017 by hiring a firefighter and covering shifts at regular time versus overtime. And there's a degree of certainty that this move will also save the city money in 2018. You have the ancillary benefit of less strain on our existing staff, so I'm in favor of this. What I would like to see is an update to this memo at budget time in 2018, when we're 3/4 of the way through the year next year, and just an update on how things are tracking and if the plan paid off in 2018 as well as in 2017. And I guess my other remark would just be, I believe our current CBA with the firefighters does make staffing subject to budgetary appropriation. So I guess I don't share Alderman Wallach's concerns about the temporary versus permanent. I'd rather hire a more quality employee as a permanent position, and if 2018, 2019, 2020 rolls around and we decide the position is not needed, then we just would appropriate less money for one less position. But that's all I have.
Or allow it to expire through attrition.
Sure.
Okay. I'm sorry, Alderman Charbonneau, did I get to you earlier, or did you?
I'm going to make.
You hit your
next speaker's on the line.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind, I'll come back to you. Alderman Miguel?
Thank you, Mayor. I thought you were avoiding me.
No, you and Anderson had taken you in order.
Okay. Oh, I didn't realize this thing. Very good. Hey, just to piggyback on what's just been said is, it seems like we, to use the chief's words, are moving from an old normal to a new normal, and if we are, then that need is going to be there for quite a while. Another reality is what the mayor just commented on, is that from time to time there's attrition, either or retirement. So it seems to me that there is an opportunity to review this decision every time that there's an opening for whatever reason that might be. And perhaps at some point we might return to the old normal. So I think, again, every time there's a retirement, and I expect there will be a few in the not too distant future, this decision can be reviewed. So I think it's, I think our direction is, at least to me, is pretty clear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, sir?
That's it.
Alderman Anderson.
I think my question's been.
Has anybody answered? Okay. Alderman Charbonneau, now I'll come back to you, sir.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. I would just like to make a motion that we give the city administrator the authority to go ahead and pursue filling a position for the remainder of the year. And I realize that there will also be a budget amendment coming later, but just go ahead and authorizing the start search.
Okay. So we have a second on that?
Yes, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay. Something you have in direction. Thank you. All right. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the consent agenda. Any alderman wishing to remove anything from the consent agenda can do so at this time. And let's see here, Alderman Anderson?
Yes, Your Honor. I would propose removing the matter having to do with the special session of the change with regard to the special session, and also with regard to the findings of fact and conclusions of law with respect to the Crestwood property matter.
Okay, so Chapter 2 revisions, special meetings, Section 2-24.
Yes, sir.
All right, Anderson, and the findings of fact. All right. Okay, and Alderman Wallach, your light is on.
Yeah, I'd like to move from the consent agenda the ordinance as it relates to the parking zone camera.
Okay. All right. Okay, with that in mind, I would ask the And I see no other lights. I would ask the city clerk to read the consent agenda, please, for us.
We need a motion.
Yeah, we need a motion and a second.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those,
Who was the second?
Alderman.
Alderman, maybe, yeah. We can do by voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay, the city clerk proceed.
We read the motion for the second.
I'm sorry?
We did a motion for the second.
Make a motion for a second reading.
Approved.
I thought we just did it once. Okay,
First reading.
okay. That's right, for the ordinances, I'm sorry. Okay, so we need a motion and a second for the second reading.
So
We have that, okay? And the second by Charbonneau. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay, city clerk, please proceed.
Approval of the June 27, 2017 regular meeting minutes and ordinance approving the agreement with Lorenz and Associates, Inc. for the Government Center reworking project and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city. An ordinance approving the agreement with Keesler Roofing Co., Inc. for the White Cliff Community Center reworking project and authorizing the mayor and the city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city. An ordinance amending Chapter 2, Article 4 of the Municipal Code of the City of Crestwood, Missouri to revise Section 2-102 relating to the budget documents. And an ordinance to purchase, authorizing purchase of heart monitor defibrillator for the Crestwood Fire Department from Zoll Medical Corporation in the amount not to exceed $26,000. I will now read the ordinances for a second time. An ordinance approving the agreement with Lorenz and Associates, Inc. for the Government Center reroofing project and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city. An ordinance approving the agreement with Keesler Roofing Company, Inc. for the White Cliff Community Center reroofing project and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city. An ordinance amending Chapter 2, Article 4 of the Municipal Code of the City of Crestwood, Missouri to revise Section 2-102 relating to budget documents. An ordinance authorizing the purchase of a heart monitor defibrillator for the Crestwood Fire Department from Zoll Medical Corporation in an amount not to exceed $26,000.
Will the city clerk please take roll call?
Alderman Breeding?
Yes.
Alderman Wall?
Yes.
Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
Alderman Maybe?
Yes.
Alderman Miguel?
Yes.
Alderman Anderson?
Yes.
6 ayes. The consent agenda has passed.
Right. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next item on the agenda would be the items removed from the consent agenda. It appears that the first item would be Chapter 2 revisions, special meeting sections 2-24. Alderman Anderson, you're the one that requested this be removed. I'm giving you the floor, sir.
Thank you. As I understand it, presently for special meetings, we require a quorum of 6 aldermen, and this change would lower that number to 5, which would be in accordance with what the city charter allows. I am thinking over this change, since we're dealing with a special meeting, and since we have 2 regularly scheduled meetings in any given month, the special meeting would seem to be looking at something more extraordinary, and so I would say that it's justified to have a higher quorum requirement so that a pattern would be given to study and that it be taken up in due course. So I think we should leave it as it is at 6 and try and preserve as much of the business for regular meetings where you've got more time to study and the matters can be considered in due course. So I would recommend that it stay at 6. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else care to comment? Alderman Mead, your lights on?
Yes, sir. I would agree with much of Alderman Anderson's sentiments behind this one. I went back and looked at this, and obviously we substantially revised our rules of order back in early 2016, I believe, after starting the process in 2015. The particular line out was originally put in the city code in the 1960s. We did not amend it in 1995 when the charter was adopted, and the provision we're proposing to change tonight was not, I went back and checked, was not changed by the 2016 ordinance that did tweak the first part of 224. So we added, if you look at the first page, so page 349 of the packet on 224, before we had the mayor could only by telephone call or mail call a special meeting, and we added to really fit with the practice of the last decade that electronic mail was permissible, and we updated the first part of it, but this special quorum was not adjusted, and in light of the charter, for better or worse, if you look at 310B of the charter, it just says the quorum is one more than half, or 5, and it doesn't specify whether it applies to regular or special meetings. I think Alderman Anderson's point about special meetings should potentially have a higher quorum is well taken. I would say most cities seem to have a higher quorum. Not that it would happen here, but there's the opportunity for gamesmanship if, say, an ordinance is voted up on a close vote, a 4-4 with the mayor breaking the tie, or a 5-3, something like that, and then the mayor could call a snap special meeting 24, 36, 48 hours later if he knew certain people were out of town or something, and try to kind of adjust the vote. Again, not something I think would happen here. I don't recall this ever being a problem in the city, but I don't think in light of the charter the language can stand as is. So I think our choices are either to do what this ordinance proposes tonight, which is just to strike it out and say our quorum is always 5, or to go to the voters with a charter amendment. So that's my take, and I guess I would welcome discussion on that. If we think the provision's important enough to include, I think we should go to the voters with it. That's the board's sentiment. Or if we think 5's fine, then we just pass this ordinance tonight. But I don't think we should leave it as is.
I'd ask the city clerk to offer her opinion on this. Our city attorney, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yes, my concern, and I did discuss this with the city administrator, I think, which partly led to this, is that the charter is not, as Alderman maybe pointed out, the charter doesn't distinguish between the regular and special meetings. The charter says that a quorum shall constitute one more than half of the total number of the authorized members of the board. And the paragraphs before talks about special and regular meetings, and my concern would be that we'll end up in a situation where there's a discrepancy between the code and the charter, and for that reason my recommendation would be that the code amendment be adopted to be consistent with the charter, to eliminate any confusion. And again, there are reasons to have a higher majority for a special meeting, but I think that you would need to amend your charter to do that.
Okay. Alderman Miguel.
My sentiment was been pretty much stated by both Alderman Mabee and Anderson. I think the higher benchmark is reasonable. It's not asking for the number of affirmative votes on an issue, it's just asking for a quorum. When a special meeting is called, I've missed more than one because I had prior plans. And trying to recall, I can only recall one meeting, one Board of Aldermen meeting, in which there were only 5 members present. So I think it would be a rarity to occur, but I would be in favor of keeping the higher standard. And that's all I have.
Meaning 6 rather than 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And 3/4, 3/4 of makes sense to me. And that language is used in different places in the charter. For example, it requires 3/4 of the membership to override veto. And there are a couple of other things there that for an investigation, as another example, that requires a supermajority. So it's not an unusual number, and if it's necessary to revise the charter, then perhaps then I would say that would be the way to go. But let the voters decide. Thank you.
I think my only concern is that, the charter is, the law of the land, so to speak. And, it does state that quorum is one more than half the membership. And my concern would be if we're going to start changing the charter by ordinance, what kind of precedent are we setting by not giving the voters their due and the opportunity to vote on this issue? I mean, I think that's why the Charter Commission was set up, to review the charter amendments, which Alderman Wallach did, and I think to change it at this point in time may be inappropriate. That's my feeling. Alderman Anderson, you're next.
Yes, as I understand it, from what Alderman Mabee has reported, this higher number has existed for a very long time. It's been coexistent with the charter. In other words, it's been there even though you've had the charter saying only one more than a majority. So you could take that as it's an accepted practice, and I don't think there would be any confusion that the number is 6. I mean, there wouldn't be any confusion. You either have 6 or you don't. I mean, it's spelled out what the quorum requirement would be for that. So in other words, I think we've operated with this for years, and no one has ever had an issue. So and as I understood the memo, maybe I misunderstood the city attorney's memo, but as I understood it, it says it's legally permissible for the code to enlarge upon the requirements of the charter. So based on that, I certainly don't think we could be less than the charter, but I don't know that the charter prohibits us from making a higher requirement for something that's not a regular meeting. So based on that, I think we could leave things as they are.
Alderman Wallach?
Yeah, again, I've read the charter. The only thing is, in the last section of that says, if a quorum fails to attend any meetings, it shall stand adjourned until the next meeting or special meeting. I think the intent of that language in there does encompass special meetings as well as regular meetings. And a quorum is consistent with one more than half of the majority. And I think that's the intent, because they put that word special meeting in there. So, again, when it comes to motion vote, I agree with the recommendation that's been made. I think we need to make a change in code to reflect the language in the charter.
Okay. Alderman, maybe you were next, and then Alderman Brady.
I guess first a question to either the city clerk or the city administrator. If the board were to decide to put a charter amendment to the quorum section to the voters at the next April aldermanic election, would there be any kind of additional cost to the city, or because that's already an election, would there be no
I don't
cost?
think you can. Doesn't it read that we can only call the charter commission to make changes every 10 years? Am I correct?
Well, that would be my second question, would be to the city attorney. There's a charter commission called for in 13.8, and then you have the charter amendment procedure in 13.7. And I guess that's my question is, can the Board of Aldermen independently put charter amendments on the ballot without convening the charter commission?
I'm only hesitating because
And if
we've
you want to look
been
at
through
that,
this
I'll put you
and
on the side.
and I don't want to be inconsistent with what, yeah, so I would like to look at it, and it wouldn't be, it's going back and looking at everything that we've been through.
Sure, I know there was an issue of the timing of the
Right.
convening of the charter review committee. So I guess my twofold question to the city attorney, not tonight, but if you could update us, at or before the next meeting, would be, can the Board of Aldermen independently put a charter amendment on the ballot? And if not, can we convene the charter review committee to evaluate this issue? My thought tonight, while we're waiting on those questions, would be we postpone this ordinance to the next meeting. And then if the city attorney says, no, we're stuck for the time, I would support passing this ordinance to line up the charter and the code. I agree with the city attorney and Alderman Wallach. I think it'd be dangerous to leave these things and try to stand on that language. And I understand, and Alderman Anderson's right, that language has been there forever, but there's a ton of code language that we've been working on revising massive portions of it that are in direct or implicit conflict with the charter that really should have been done back in '95 and they weren't, but we're dealing with it now. So I don't know if we can really hang our hat on that it's been there for a while and we haven't changed it. If the city attorney comes back and says, yes, you can put this on the ballot in April, either by way independently or through the charter review committee, I suggest we go that route and then we postpone this ordinance all the way until May and see what the voters think about it. And if the voters amend the charter, we leave it as is. If they don't, then we make the change at that point. So I would make a motion if there, Alderman Brady has a light on.
You got other lights, so.
Oh, you said you do not have anything, Alderman Brady?
My question is
Okay.
Your question, you don't have a question anymore.
no, I don't know.
Okay, in that case, I would just make a motion.
Then Alderman Miguel's light is on, so.
Okay, well, if you'll come back to me at some point, I'd have a motion to postpone to the next meeting.
Okay. Alderman Miguel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Section 13.7 of the Charter. Amendments to this charter may be framed and submitted to the voters by commission as provided by law and the Constitution of the State of Missouri for a complete charter, comma, by the Board of Aldermen or by petition, etc. So it clearly reads that an amendment to the charter can be made, submitted by this board. I have the charter if anyone would like to see it. And it's already been mentioned that there's ongoing work here with the code book, and I would point out that there are other differences between the charter and other documents in the city. I'm not sure about the civil service rules, how they read, but I do know that there's a difference between the charter and the MOU with the fire department. And that's relative to political activity.
Yield the floor.
I yield the floor. Thank you.
All right, sir. Okay, Alderman, maybe you had
I'll make a motion to postpone this ordinance to our next meeting to allow the city attorney to get back to us on the potential charter amendment.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Nay. Okay, we will postpone this until the next meeting. That'll hopefully give us 2 more aldermen to respond. Okay, Alderman Anderson, you had the second one for the findings of fact.
Yes. In reviewing the findings of fact, I thought it would be appropriate to amend finding of fact, which is contained in paragraph 23. I drafted some language, presented that to the city attorney who revised it. I agree with the revision. It would add this language, which hopefully you have in front of you. Moreover, due in part to the removal of the trees and other vegetation from the property by Crestwood Properties, the property does not conform to the original site plan proposed for the property as set forth in ordinance 3356. As I understand it, when this matter came before us, the city planner indicated that the action by Crestwood Properties had really done great harm to what was proposed as a landscape plan or a site plan for this property. I would not want to see Crestwood Properties rely on the fact that it was granted a permit based on what was a proposed landscape plan, and then not be held accountable to the plan that was proposed. So I think we need to add this language to say that that the applicant failed to comply with what had even been proposed originally for this site. So my reason for adding that.
Okay. Alderman Charbonneau,
I just wanted to mention that I appreciate Alderman Anderson doing the research on this and adding this. I think it's a great addition, and I fully support it.
Okay. So, Alderman Anderson, do you wish to make a motion to for a first reading with the amendment?
With the amendment.
As noted. Okay. There are no other lights, so I'm assuming no one else has any other comments or questions regarding your amendment. Do we have a second to that?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approval of the amendment to the ordinance regarding the findings of fact. I'm sorry?
Is it done? It's not by we're just approving it as itself. It's not done by ordinance.
Right, it's a resolution,
Right.
Resolution 1703.
Okay, all right. I thought we were just, I thought we had an amendment before us tonight.
We do.
We are amending the findings
And
of
so
fact.
we're asking for a first reading as amended by Alderman Anderson.
But
We've
it's not,
been doing that for,
it's not an ordinance, though. It's going to be attached to a resolution.
So you don't have to read whatever.
Okay, so anyway, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay,
Is that just for the amendment?
that's for the amendment. So that'll add the, what Alderman Anderson just read regarding the moreover due in part to the removal of trees and other vegetation from the property by Crestwood Properties. The property does not conform to the original site plan proposed for the property as set forth in the ordinance. Okay. So that will be an amendment to the findings of fact. Okay. Now, we have the ordinance, Bill, well, we haven't, see, this was the findings of fact. No.
It's a resolution. Is there an actual resolution? Correct.
1703.
I don't think, it's just not in his packet.
It's not in the packet.
but it's not. Sorry, it's probably because it's on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Okay, now I have a resolution.
Sorry.
Okay, so it's resolution 17-03, and it is a resolution approving findings of fact and conclusions of law regarding the application of Crescent Properties LLC for approval of a site plan for the modification to the landscaping for wholesale siding depot at 9860 Big Bend Road. Do we have a motion and a second for approval?
So,
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay, resolution approved. Okay, next item was Alderman Wallach, the no parking zone for Cameron Avenue.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. I just had some history here in regards to who brought some concerns to the city in regards to the no parking. And some other questions I do have following that in regards to where is the overflow coming from? Have you isolated as to what particular business along that on Cameron Avenue that's contributing to this?
I think we discussed that at a previous meeting, and it was said that the traffic from that was coming from the mobile on the run, where the business people were coming in the morning and parking there on camera and then going over to the mobile.
Okay.
And if you look at the pictures,
well,
it's pretty obvious that...
Well, okay.
You know.
A couple of questions, though.
Go ahead.
Some of the pictures looks like there's sidewalks there. It looks like vehicles parking on the sidewalks. Is there an ordinance in place that prohibits parking on sidewalks? Is there fines for that?
Mr. Gillum's nodding.
Nodding?
Yes, there are.
Okay. I just wonder whether there was tickets provided given to these individuals that are parking on the sidewalks. I know this is soon to be a no parking area. But also along that, again, looks like to be equipment that's on one of the photographs, was 402. Is that from a business or is that from construction on Cameron Avenue? Where's that? Do we know?
It's just people, that's just, the construction crews parking there so they can go over and get donuts or coffee or whatever in the morning and then head out to the job.
Okay. All right. Yeah, again, I'm all in favor. Again, I'm just kind of questioning in regards to get a photograph of a vehicle on the sidewalk, and I thought that was prohibited and was affirmed that it is. So, okay. All right. I'll yield the floor.
Okay. Alderman Sherwood.
If there's no other lights on, I'll make a motion that we approve this. It looks like there might be a light on. I'll yield until that. If you can come back, I'd appreciate it.
Alderman maybe does have his light on.
My apologies. I just have one sentence to add. I thought that this ordinance is fine, and I just want to add that I think it's going to be consistent with our comprehensive plan that we're hoping to propose connecting Camera to Rico, and I think that'll just increase traffic on Camera with trucks making deliveries throughout the industrial park. I think all lorries have passed this ordinance so that you don't have a choke point at the top of this road.
I think your point's well taken. I think that every one of the businesses on camera basically has to comply with the parking spaces requirements. And so I don't know of any business that doesn't have enough parking to accommodate their employees or their customers. So I think this is an appropriate measure.
Well, and the fact that every single business requested this too, I think that's that's pretty monumental.
There you go. Okay. Alderman Sherwood?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this ordinance.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay, I guess we need a motion and a second for first reading. Let me find the ordinance here. I got it in my packet. Okay. An ordinance to amend Chapter 14, Article 7 of the Municipal Code of the City of Crestwood to revise Section 14-185 relating to no parking zones. May I have a motion?
So, I believe I already did. Did we do this?
Yeah, we did
Okay,
that.
give me a bill number.
1732.
1732.
32.
Okay.
Let's sit down.
Bill number 17-32, introduced by Alderman Charbonneau. An ordinance to amend Chapter 14, Article 7 of the Municipal Code of the City of Crestwood to revise Section 14-185 relating to no parking zones.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Charbonneau.
Yes.
Alderman Anderson.
Yes.
Alderman Wallet.
Yes.
Alderman Maybe.
Yes.
Alderman McGowan.
Yes.
Alderman Green.
Yes.
6 ayes, the motion has passed.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second for a second reading. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Alderman Wallach, could you do the honors, please?
Bill number 17-32, introduced by Alderman Charbonneau. An ordinance to amend Chapter 14, Article 7 of the Municipal Code of the City of Crestwood to revise Section 14-185 relating to no parking zones.
Roll call.
Alderman McGowan.
Yes.
Alderman Charbonneau.
Yes.
Alderman Maybe.
Yes.
Alderman Green.
Yes.
Alderman Anderson.
Yes.
Alderman Wallet.
Yes.
6 ayes, the motion has passed.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the items that were pulled from the consent agenda. Next item on the agenda is new business. And Alderman, maybe if you don't mind, before you get into your discussion on the drones, I'd just like to say that, as some of you may or may not know, we've been having problems with our audio system. We're not sure whether it's totally going to fail or continue to operate, but it is a considerable expense, I'm assuming. I've asked Mr. Simpson to investigate what the cost of replacing that would be through Tech Electronics, and I think we're still in the process of getting that information. But I did want to make the board aware of the fact that we may have to come before this board soon for a budget adjustment in order to cover the costs of that system. I think it's very important to the city to continue to provide the audio that we do and make it available on our website. So, okay, Alderman, maybe.
I'll try to be relatively brief. We had probably a couple of months ago requested this be put on an agenda as a discussion point. At the time, I had become aware that 3 West County cities, Ellisville and Clarkson Valley and Wildwood, had passed substantially similar drone ordinances. Since that time, I've confirmed at least Chesterfield, St. Charles, and St. Peter's have as well. Those 6 ordinances were distributed to the board. They differ in some respects, but they are substantially the same. I'm sure the respective city attorneys probably just tweak them for their own use. And I think reading some news reports, some other cities, I believe Hazelwood, I did not have time to pull their ordinance, but some other cities have started adopting drone regulations just in light of the rapidly advancing technology. At the time when I requested this be put on the agenda as a discussion point, the part that seemed appropriate to me, and I'm just by reference, I'm looking at the Clarkson Valley ordinance, is the Section 1 of the various ordinances that makes it a constructive invasion of privacy and makes an ordinance violation to use a drone to basically invade someone's privacy and record them in a way that would be offensive to a person of reasonable sensibilities, and basically give the police department another tool in their toolbox if someone was using a drone for nefarious purposes and having just an ordinance tailored to that. So that was the part I thought was most appropriate. I had not spent a great deal of time analyzing the regulations on the various ordinances that compose Section 2, other than to confirm that the ordinances are all substantially similar. They do purport to regulate only drones flown for hobby or recreational purposes. So these would not affect utility drones or police drones or military drones or anything like that. This would just be your hobby drones. Indicates you're supposed to keep them, away from aircraft. You're supposed to not, keep them away from vehicles and people. Don't fly them next to airports or helicopters without getting permission from the control tower. Don't fly them after dark unless it's fully lit. So as I went through them, the regulations seemed somewhat common sense, but I won't sit here and say I've fully analyzed all of them. But I think in my mind, this would be something I'd want the city staff, police department, city administrator, and city attorney to look over these ordinances and at least bring one before the board with the invasion of privacy component. But if it's appropriate, and it probably is given the number of cities that have looked at this, that we also adopt these kind of catch-all regulations for hobby drones to make sure that we've got some reasonable regulations, and if people are being reckless with the drones, again, there's some recourse. That's what I have.
And we had a representative here from AT&T tonight who was going to speak on the subject and asked the board to exclude the utilities, Union Electric, and I think I sent you.
Yes, and I read that gentleman's statement, and he basically said there's two ways the ordinances have excluded them. There's either the explicit, this doesn't apply to them, or they make it where the regulations affirmatively only apply to hobby or recreational drones, which is the way that most of the cities have chosen to do that. But I guess the utilities are using drones for all kinds of things, and they have generally wanted to not be covered by city rules.
Right. Well, and they're using them now for checking their wires. Ameren also uses them for checking wires during storms and things of that type, so they'll fly them into neighborhoods over the tops of their utility poles to look for down wires and things where otherwise they wouldn't be able to get in with a man.
Sure. No, I read that letter. That seemed perfectly reasonable. And the way I read it is, I was pointing like the Clarkson Valley ordinance to me seemed, pretty straightforward. But I would look to the city attorney and city staff to probably look at the various ordinances that have passed, and if there's things that they think are inappropriate for Crestwood, and certain ones are more appropriate for Crestwood, to give us kind of a conglomeration ordinance that would be the best for our city.
Okay. So are you asking for the city attorney to draft an ordinance for a future meeting?
That would be my request. Okay. I would like to hear board discussion if we think this is necessary, but just given the number of cities that have jumped on this, and you hear, I think the power of drones is a positive thing. I think it's incredible. They're used not only by businesses, but some of the hobbies people are doing with them are great. But you hear a lot of news reports with some pretty either malicious or reckless things happening with drones too. So I think having a regulatory scheme in place is probably appropriate.
Okay. Any other comments from the board on this issue? Okay. Do we want to provide the city attorney then? There are no other lights.
Yeah, I'd make the motion.
That agrees with your recommendation.
I guess we'll find out on the vote. But I'd make a motion to have the city attorney bring us an ordinance later this year on this subject.
Okay. We have a second. We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay. Any time frame?
I think we've got a lot going on, so as work allows.
Okay. All right.
This year.
Okay, this year? Okay. All right. There were two other things that I want for not new business, but future issues. So we're on that topic now. And the one is what we want to do with the Memorial Committee with regards to our boards and commissions, whether we want to continue to support them or whether we want them to make them a private group. After all, they've kind of expanded their own responsibilities beyond what they were originally organized for. The original organization was to maintain and take care of the monument out here. But they've now taken on a number of other responsibilities. They are a nonprofit, so they do go out and seek funds at locations like Sam's and places like that to help bolster their budget. So the question will be for a future issue is, do we want to maintain them as one of our boards and commissions? I will say that there are 2 members that are not Crestwood residents. So the chairman, Paul Tagg, and Scott Ward. But you know, it's getting harder and harder to find veterans, you know, to serve. And there are just not a lot of them in Crestwood right now that are, you know, World War II anymore. And you know, Vietnam, most of those individuals are either working or they have not stepped up to volunteer for this committee. So I think right now we have Mr. Ford and Mr. Ulmer are the 2 residents from Crestwood, if I'm not mistaken. Alderman McGill, you're currently aldermanic representative to that board, but if we do away with this committee, then let them operate on their own, then we'll be doing away with that aldermanic representative. And that was the second item then that I would be bringing up for future issues, and we'll put it on the agenda, but it'll be the assignment of the boards and commissions. I think you all received what I emailed out. We have made a couple of changes and to those, and one was that planning and zoning is Alderman Anderson. That's a pretty heavy board to be running, and so that was going to be the only board we were going to assign you to. And if we did away with the Memorial Committee, then I'd reassign Alderman Kennedy and Alderman McGill to other boards. So that's where we are right now. That's a decision we have to make. And I think we also have some work to do on the Sappington House, you know, as to whether or not we want to incorporate them as one of our boards and have someone attend one of their meetings. That's been discussed, I think, by this board on numerous occasions. So those are issues I think we need to resolve, and I'd like to do it if we can, you know, within a short period of time, so that we can get everything in order. Okay, Alderman, maybe.
The only other future issue I had would be if the city attorney comes back with their research and says we can independently put a charter amendment on the ballot in April, I would like to see, perhaps in conjunction with our next meeting, where we postpone the ordinance for till next meeting for now, an ordinance that would place a proposed charter amendment on the April ballot that would add a line to the quorum section that would have the 3/4 quorum for special meetings and make the charter consistent with the code instead of vice versa.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. Anyone else have any future issues? I see none. See no other lights. So next item is adjournment. So I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Okay. Thank you to all the members of the public that showed up here tonight. Mr. Clark.
There's thousands watching from